Arctic Ocean is a vast and unforgiving expanse of white that stretches beyond the horizon. It is a place where silence reigns supreme, and the biting wind whispers secrets of those who dared to challenge its frozen might. In the early 20th century, the waters north of Alaska were a treacherous playground for brave sailors and sturdy vessels. Among these ships was a steel steamer that would eventually become one of the most enduring mysteries of the maritime world. This vessel was not merely a machine of iron and steam, but a legend in the making that would defy the laws of nature and the expectations of man. It was known as the Baychimo, and its story begins not with a ghostly apparition, but with the solid reality of trade and commerce in a harsh environment. Built in 1914 in the shipyards of Gothenburg, Sweden, the ship was originally christened the Angermanelfen. It was a robust vessel designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the Baltic Sea ice and carry goods for the German Empire during the Great War. The ship measured over 200 feet in length and was powered by a triple expansion steam engine that hummed with a rhythmic beat. For years, it served its German masters, faithfully navigating the cold waters of Northern Europe with a crew of disciplined sailors. However, the tides of war shifted, and the German defeat led to the ship being handed over to the British government as part of war reparations. This transfer marked the beginning of a new chapter that would take the vessel to the far side of the world. In the year 1921, the Hudson Bay Company acquired the sturdy steamer for a sum of £15,000. The company needed a vessel capable of navigating the treacherous waters of the Canadian Arctic to collect furs and deliver supplies to remote outposts. They renamed the ship the Baychimo, and it was sent to Ardros in Scotland for a refit that would prepare it for the brutal conditions of the Western Arctic. The hull was reinforced, and the living quarters were modified to accommodate the crew during long voyages in sub-zero temperatures. Under the command of seasoned captains, the Baychimo became a familiar sight along the northern coast of North America, making annual voyages from Vancouver to the trading posts of the Victoria Island coast. For 9 successful seasons, the Baychimo braved the ice and storms of the Arctic Ocean. It carried tea and sugar and tobacco and ammunition to the isolated communities of the north, and returned with holds filled with valuable pelts of fox and beaver and muskrat. The crew became accustomed to the harsh realities of the North, learning to read the ice and the sky for signs of danger. They knew that the Arctic was a jealous mistress who demanded respect and vigilance at all times. Captain Sidney Cornwell was a man of experience, and he guided the ship with a steady hand, earning the respect of his men and the company. But even the most experienced captain cannot control the whims of nature, especially in a place where the weather can turn deadly in a matter of hours. The summer of 1930. One began like any other for the crew of the Baychimo. They departed Vancouver in July, laden with supplies for the western Arctic outposts. The journey north was uneventful, and the ship made good time as it steamed through the Bering Strait and into the Chukchi Sea. The crew worked with the efficiency of long practice unloading cargo at each stop and loading the precious furs that were the lifeblood of the Hudson Bay Company trade. As they reached the end of their run near Victoria Island, the days began to shorten and the temperature dropped steadily. The captain knew that the window of opportunity was closing and that they needed to turn back soon to avoid being trapped by the encroaching winter ice. By late September, the Baychimo had completed its trading for the season and turned its bow westward toward the open waters of the Bering Sea. The cargo hold was packed with furs worth over $1 million in modern currency, a fortune that the company was eager to secure. However, the Arctic had other plans for the ship and its crew. As they navigated the narrow channels along the Alaskan coast, the weather took a turn for the worse. The wind howled from the north, driving massive sheets of pack ice toward the shore. The temperature plummeted, and the sea began to freeze around them, creating a deadly trap that threatened to crush the steel hull of the steamer. On the first day of October, the ice closed in around the Baychimo, near the village of Wainwright, Alaska. The ship was surrounded by a sea of white that stretched in every direction, blocking any hope of escape. The engines strained against the frozen grip, but the ice was relentless and unforgiving. Captain Sidney Cornwell realized that they were stuck and ordered the engines stopped to conserve coal. The crew prepared for a long wait, hoping that a shift in the wind would open a lead in the ice and allow them to break free. But the wind continued to blow from the north, piling the ice higher and pressing it tighter against the sides of the ship. The steel plates groaned under the immense pressure, and the men listened with growing unease. As the days turned into weeks, the situation grew increasingly desperate for the trapped sailors. The ship was listing slightly to the port side, and the ice had begun to buckle the deck plates. The nearest outpost was miles away across the frozen wasteland, and the crew knew that they could not survive the winter on board the stricken vessel. The Hudson Bay Company sent aircraft to evacuate some of the crew, but Captain Cornwell and 14 men chose to stay behind. They were determined to protect the valuable cargo and wait for the spring thaw to free their ship. They built a small wooden shelter on the ice near the ship, using timber and tarpaulins to create a refuge from the biting wind. The men settled into a routine of survival, checking the ship daily and keeping watch over the shifting ice. The cold was a constant companion, seeping into their bones and numbing their minds. The sun dipped below the horizon for the last time, plunging them into the perpetual twilight of the Arctic winter. The only light came from the stars and the shimmering curtains of the aurora borealis, which danced across the sky like ghostly spirits. It was in this eerie landscape that the Baychimo began to take on a life of its own. The ship loomed above them, a dark silhouette against the snow, a silent sentinel waiting for its destiny to unfold. On the night of November 24th, a ferocious blizzard struck the camp with a violence that shook the men to their core. The wind screamed like a banshee, tearing at the canvas of their shelter and burying them under drifts of snow. Visibility was reduced to 0, and the temperature dropped to 50 degrees below 0. For 3 days, the storm raged, trapping the men inside their wooden hut and cutting them off from the outside world. They huddled together for warmth, listening to the howling wind and the groaning of the ice. When the storm finally abated and the men emerged from their shelter, they looked toward the place where the Baychimo had been anchored. To their shock and disbelief, the ship was gone. The place where the Baychimo had stood was now a ridge of jagged ice reaching 50 feet into the air. Captain Sidney Cornwell and his men stared at the empty space, trying to comprehend what had happened. They concluded that the storm had crushed the ship and sent it to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. The loss was a heavy blow, but they were grateful to be alive. They gathered their meager belongings and prepared to make the trek to the nearest settlement, believing that the Baychimo was lost forever. They sent word to the Hudson Bay Company that the ship had sunk and the valuable cargo was lost to the depths. However, the story of the Baychimo was far from over. A week later, an Inuit hunter arrived at the settlement where the crew was staying. He brought news that would change everything. He claimed to have seen the ship floating in the ice some 45 miles to the south. The captain was skeptical, but he gathered a team and set out to investigate. After a grueling journey across the frozen sea, they found the Baychimo. The ship was not at the bottom of the ocean, but was listing heavily and encased in ice. It had been pushed by the storm and the shifting pack, but it had refused to sink. The survival of the vessel seemed almost supernatural, a defiance of the elements that had claimed so many other ships. Captain Cornwell boarded the ship and found it to be intact but structurally compromised. He decided that the vessel was not seaworthy and that it would be too dangerous to try and salvage it. Instead, the crew spent the next few days retrieving the most valuable furs from the hold. They worked quickly, fearing that the ice would shift again and take the ship down with them. Once they had salvaged what they could, Captain Cornwell made the difficult decision to abandon the Baychimo. He believed that the ship would soon break apart and sink, and he did not want to risk the lives of his men any further. They left the ship to the mercy of the Arctic and returned to civilization. The crew of the Baychimo returned to Vancouver, and the Hudson Bay Company wrote off the ship as a loss. They expected never to see it again, but the Baychimo did not sink. It drifted alone in the icy waters, a ghost ship with no crew and no destination. In the months that followed, reports began to trickle in from Inuit hunters and explorers who had seen the ship. They described a dark vessel moving silently through the fog, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. The ship seemed to be guided by an unseen hand, navigating the treacherous ice fields without a human soul at the helm. In the spring of 1932, a dog sledder traveling near the Alaskan coast spotted the Baychimo drifting near the shore. He boarded the ship and found it eerie and silent. The breakfast dishes were still on the table in the mess hall, frozen in time. The ship was a time capsule of the moment. It was abandoned, preserving the lives of the men who had once called it home. The explorer took some souvenirs and left feeling a sense of unease. He reported the sighting, but by the time anyone could return, the ship had vanished again, swallowed by the mist and the ice. The legend of the ghost ship of the Arctic began to spread among the sailors and the people of the North. Some said the ship was cursed, doomed to wander the seas forever as punishment for some forgotten sin. Others believed that it was protected by the spirits of the Inuit who watched over the land and the sea. Sightings continued throughout the 1930s. In March of 1933, a group of Inuit trap hunters found the ship drifting calmly in a stretch of open water. They boarded it, but a sudden storm blew, entrapping them on the vessel for 10 days. They survived on the canned food left in the galley, listening to the creaking of the hull and the howling of the wind. The experience of the trapped hunters added a new layer of fear to the legend. They spoke of strange noises in the night, of footsteps on the metal decks when no one was there. They said the ship felt alive, as if it were watching them. When the storm finally cleared, they fled the ship, vowing never to return. The Baychimo continued its lonely journey, drifting west and then north, carried by the currents of the Beaufort Gyre. It became a moving landmark, a part of the Arctic landscape that was both real and unreal. It was a constant reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human endeavors. In 1934, the crew of a passing schooner spotted the Baychimo. They considered trying to tow it to port, but the ice conditions were too dangerous. They sailed close enough to read the name on the bow, the letters rusted but still legible. They watched as the ghost ship drifted away into a bank of fog, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The Baychimo was becoming a myth, a story told around campfires and in the warm galleys of other ships. It was the Flying Dutchman of the North, a vessel that could not find rest. Years turned into decades, and the world changed. The Second World War engulfed the globe, bringing conflict even to the remote corners of the Arctic. Yet the Baychimo continued to wander, indifferent to the wars of men. In 1939, a Captain Hugh Paulson attempted to salvage the ship. He managed to board it and attach a tow line, but the ice intervened once again. massive floes moved in threatening to crush his own vessel. He was forced to cut the line and abandon the prize, watching as the Baychimo drifted away into the whiteness. It was as if the ship wanted to be alone, rejecting any attempt to bring it back to the world of men. During the war years, sightings were rare, but they did occur. Pilots flying over the Arctic reported seeing a ship locked in the ice, far from any known shipping lanes. They described it as a dark scar on the white surface of the ocean. Some thought it was a secret German raider or a supply ship, but closer inspection revealed the rusted hull of the old steamer. The Baychimo had become a part of the geography, a wandering island of steel and wood. It survived storms that would have sunk modern ships and ice pressures that should have crushed it like a tin can. After the war, the sightings continued sporadically. In 1949, frequent reports came from the Inuit populations along the coast. They saw the ship drifting near Point Barrow, sometimes close enough to see the empty bridge. They respected the vessel, keeping their distance and treating it with a mix of fear and reverence. To them, it was a spirit ship, a part of the supernatural world that existed alongside the physical one. The Baychimo had transcended its origins as a cargo steamer and become something elemental, something that belonged to the ice. In 1962, a group of oil surveyors spotted the ship again. They were flying a helicopter over the Beaufort Sea when they saw the distinctive profile of the Baychimo below them. The ship was listing and covered in rust, but it was still afloat. They landed on the ice nearby and walked up to the hull. The silence was deafening. The wind whistled through the rigging, and the open portholes stared back at them like dead eyes. They climbed aboard and found the interior ravaged by time and cold. The cabins were filled with snow, and the furniture was rotting. Yet the ship felt strangely preserved, held in a state of suspended animation by the freezing temperatures. The surveyors left the ship deeply disturbed by the experience. They reported that the vessel felt hostile, as if it resented their presence. They took photographs that showed a ghost ship against a backdrop of endless ice. These images became famous, cementing the visual of the Baychimo in the public imagination. It was a haunting reminder of the past, a relic of an era of exploration that had long since ended. The ship was a survivor, a testament to the quality of its construction and the strange vagaries of fate. The last confirmed sighting of the Baychimo occurred in 1969, exactly 38 years after it was abandoned. A group of Inuit hunters saw the ship stuck in the pack ice of the Chukchi Sea. It was frozen fast, surrounded by towering pressure ridges. They did not board it, but they watched it for a long time. The ship looked tired, its hull battered and scarred by decades of abuse. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving bare, rusted metal exposed to the elements. And yet it stood proud, a defiant monument in the wilderness. After 1969, the Baychimo disappeared from human sight. No more reports came in, and no more photographs were taken. The world assumed that the ship had finally succumbed to the ice and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Expeditions were launched to find the wreck, but they returned empty-handed. The Arctic is a vast place, and the ocean floor is deep and uncharted. If the Baychimo had sunk, it had taken its secrets with it, leaving no trace of its final resting place. However, in 2006, the government of Alaska launched a project to find the ghost ship. They believed that the Baychimo might still be afloat, or that its wreck could be located and preserved as a historic site. They used modern technology, including sonar and satellite imagery, to scour the seas where the ship was last seen. They searched thousands of square miles of ocean floor, but they found nothing. The Baychimo had vanished completely, as if it had never existed. The failure of the search only deepened the mystery and fueled the legend. Some believe that the Baychimo is still out there drifting in the uncharted waters of the high Arctic. They argue that the circular currents of the Beaufort Gyre could keep a ship moving for decades, trapping it in a perpetual loop of ice and water. They point to the fact that no wreckage has ever been found as proof that the ship is still afloat. Others believe that the ship was finally crushed by the ice and lies in pieces on the seabed, covered by silt and time. But without proof, the possibility remains that the ghost ship of the Arctic is still wandering. The story of the Baychimo is more than just a maritime curiosity. It is a psychological ghost story that plays on our fear of the unknown and the uncontrollable. The image of an abandoned ship drifting aimlessly in the frozen dark evokes a primal dread. It represents the ultimate isolation, the severance of all ties with humanity. To board the Baychimo in the imagination is to step into a world where the rules of life do not apply, where the cold is absolute and the silence is eternal. Imagine standing on the rusted deck of that ship today. The wind would be the only sound, howling through the broken superstructure. The air would be thick with the smell of old iron and ice. You would feel the gentle sway of the vessel as it moves with the current, a zombie ship, obeying the laws of physics, but devoid of a soul. You would look into the dark cabins and wonder about the men who once slept there, the dreams they had, and the fears they faced. The ghosts of the Baychimo are not spirits in sheets, but the lingering memories of a time and place that no longer exist. The Arctic itself is a character in this story, a vast and malevolent entity that claims what it wants and keeps it. It is a graveyard for ships and men, a place where history is frozen in layers of ice. The Baychimo is its trophy, a prize that it parades through the mist to taunt the living. The ship serves as a reminder that for all our technology and arrogance, we are small and insignificant in the face of nature. The ice does not care about our plans or our lives. It only knows how to crush and to keep. small communities of the Alaskan coast, the elders still tell the story of the ghost ship. They warn young hunters to be wary of the fog and to respect the sea. They say that if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can hear the faint throbbing of a steam engine and the clang of a ship bell ringing in the distance. They say that the Baychimo is still out there watching and waiting. It is a phantom that refuses to cross over a restless spirit of iron and steel that hunts the horizon. The legacy of the Baychimo lives on in books and documentaries, and the minds of those who love a good mystery. It challenges us to accept that some things cannot be explained, that some disappearances are final, and yet unresolved. The ship represents the boundary between the known and the unknown, the line where the map ends and the monsters begin. It is a symbol of the enduring power of the past to haunt the present. Perhaps one day global warming will melt the ice that hides the Baychimo and reveal its fate to the world. Perhaps a future explorer will stumble upon the wreck, lying on a lonely beach or resting on the ocean floor. Or perhaps the ship will remain hidden, forever a secret kept by the Arctic until the end of time. There is a beauty in the mystery, a sense of wonder that keeps the story alive. We need ghosts to remind us that the world is still full of magic and danger. Until then, the Baychimo sails on in our collective imagination. It drifts through the nightmares of sailors and the dreams of adventurers. It is the ship that would not die, the vessel that chose the ice over the fire of the scrapyard. It wanders the white wastes, a lonely traveler on an endless journey. And if you ever find yourself looking out over the frozen ocean on a dark winter night, look closely at the horizon. You might just see a dark shape moving against the stars, a shadow in the mist. The story of the Baychimo is a chilling reminder that the ocean is a vast repository of secrets. It holds the history of humanity in its depths, preserving the triumphs and the tragedies of our species. The ghost ship of the Arctic is one of its most prized possessions, a story written in ice and steel. It is a narrative that has no end of voyage, that continues long after the crew has gone. The Baychimo is waiting out there in the cold and the dark, sailing forever into the unknown. As we close the book on this tale, let the image of the Baychimo linger in your mind. Picture the rusted hull, the empty bridge, the silent bell. Feel the cold wind on your face and hear the creak of the ice. The world is full of ghosts, but few are as tangible and as terrifying as the ship that walked away. The Baychimo is a true ghost story, not of the dead coming back to life, but of the living being swallowed by the void. It is the story of a ship that became a part of the wild, a part of the ice, a part of the eternal silence.